Hey everyone, Shin here. So this past weekend was Beta Weekend 3, and just like I did with the first two Beta Weekends, I wanted to give an impression video on what all I was able to test this weekend. I was primarily testing Scrapper, Druid, some of the Berserker since the changes, and I actually did get to test the raid out a little bit. There were a whole bunch of technical issues that happened on ANET's side that prevented the raid from really being available most of the weekend, but there were a couple of windows of opportunity for some people to get in and actually try it. And I was lucky enough to be on and available when they opened it up for the 15-minute window or so that they turned the squad UI back on. So I do have some impressions on the raid as well. As per usual, a couple disclaimers. First off, again, I only tested the Scrapper and the Druid in structured PvP. As I did with all of the other elite specs, I wanted to get a nice controlled environment to see how things felt in that situation. I know there are a lot of aspects, especially with the Druid, that would work better or may work differently in PvE or World of the World. So that is stuff that I can't really comment on. I'm just going to go by how things felt in PvP. Another disclaimer, Ranger is my least played class and my least favorite class to play. So there are probably some insights and some builds and combinations and whatnot that I wasn't able to try or I didn't get a good feeling for. So if you feel that discredits me from the whole Druid impressions, that's fair enough. I'm just throwing that out there. I still tried to look at it objectively. At any rate, with those out of the way, I'm going to jump into the 3 elite specs that I tested out this weekend, and then I'll jump into the raid stuff. Starting out with Berserker real quick, the changes that they've made since the previous beta weekend have made it feel a whole world better. The changes to Decapitate and Arc Divider, those are fantastic changes to help the build work well with the power setup as opposed to condition setups. The increased range on Arc Divider is really nice for catching people off guard, it's really nice for sniping targets. I was finding use for it in the raid even. The change to Decapitate makes it a lot more appealing when you're with a large group of people, and otherwise makes it feel like a more suitable X Primal Burst skill as opposed to what it was previously where the damage was nerfed and it just didn't feel that great. Also, as far as the increases to our condition stuff, like the Torch burn durations, the Flaming Flurry burn duration, the traits that involve burn, all of those changes feel really good. All of those increases to duration make the burning feel more rewarding. It makes it feel like having those abilities and having those traits is more worthwhile. The increase to burn duration, originally when I saw it, I didn't think it was going to be enough, but after messing around with it, it definitely does feel like it's made a difference, and I am much more willing to put those traits and skills on my bar and run around with them than I was previously. Now, as far as a few things that I do feel could still be changed or tweaked on Berserker, the Hammer Primal Burst skill, the change from the blowout or the knockback to the immobilize, it doesn't feel as impactful as before. It doesn't feel as good as I thought it would. Also, the fact that it's still awkward to land, it's still awkward with that 180 degree radius instead of 360. It makes it really hard to hit people on points. It has the tendency to get blinded, just like with Earthshaker. It's just, overall, it doesn't feel like the reward is great enough for the risks you're taking or all of the things that you have to deal with while trying to land the Rupturing Smash. So I almost feel like they should maybe revert it back to the blowout or maybe change it so it's still a 360 AoE. It just feels odd now. It doesn't feel as rewarding as Rupturing Smash did, because when Rupturing Smash was the way it was in the previous beta weekend, it felt very rewarding when you managed to land it. It was just getting it to land. It was still the awkward trying to land it wherever your target was. Now it is neither easy to land nor does it feel rewarding when you do manage to land it. That 1 second or so immobilized just doesn't quite feel that great. Now, another thing that I feel could probably be looked at a bit more is the either cast time or animations or something on Sundering Leap. The end result feels good now. The damage you can get off of it is really nice. The cooldown is nice and short as it was before. The cripple is nice for interacting with leg specialists and just keeping targets where you're trying to get them. That's all fine, but the animations feel strange. The getting it to land aspect of it feels very odd. And then when you introduce slow to the equation, it just makes it feel absolutely not fun. It does not feel good at all. Normally slow does feel kind of icky when you have it on you, but with Sundering Leap, it's just the most horrible thing I've ever felt with trying to land on things. It doesn't feel good with the animation it has plus slow. I don't know what is going on there, but it feels worse with slow than any other skill does with slow as far as I'm concerned. And then finally, there was a bug that I noticed with both Decapitate and Gunflame. I'm not sure if it's the same bug or whatnot, but it seemed to be related. When you hit your target with both of these Primal Burst skills, if the target died from that initial hit, the secondary effect would not go off. So Gunflame, if you killed your target with that first shot, the explosion would not happen. And with Decapitate, if you killed your target with the initial swing, with that initial hit, that secondary wave that would go behind your target wouldn't go off. I don't know what's causing it. It just looks like a bug that's not supposed to be there, because every other time that I hit with those skills and the target was still alive, that secondary effect would happen. It seems like there's something with maybe the trigger of the Primal Burst skills or whatnot, but that's what I noticed. Also, Gunflame is hitting the same target twice, once with the initial shot and then once again with the explosion for the same amount of damage. That doesn't look right to me. If that's intended, that's fine. I'm perfectly happy to have, a total of 14k or 21k damage on my Gunflames, but that doesn't look right to me. It looks like way too much damage for a skill that is supposed to be slightly toned down on a single target from Killshot. That's just my observation. I messed around with it in World of the World for a little bit, and I was destroying people with a Gunflame and explosion that totaled up to maybe 22,000 or so. It was a little ridiculous. So that's probably something that's going to be looked at. That is probably something I've already looked at, but just wanted to throw it out there because it is something I wanted to bring light to. Alright, moving on to the Scrapper. I had a ton of fun playing the Scrapper. It was a lot of fun running around with the hammer and hitting people with 1200 range AoE stuns and the evade on the number 3. The hammer was a lot of fun. The Scrapper as a whole was a lot of fun. The traits looked good. They all seemed to have good synergy with different things. Those things being said, there are a few aspects of Scrapper that didn't feel quite right. On the hammer, the auto attack chain felt kind of weird. It felt clunky. It felt slow. And with the benefits that are on that hammer auto attack chain, I can understand why it would be a slower auto attack, but it just didn't feel that great. The 3 attacks felt like they had too long of an aftercast between them, to where it was just, you would hit one, there'd be a small gap time, you'd hit another, small gap time, you'd hit another, and it just felt very segmented and very slow, and it didn't feel that great. The number 2, this was entirely a visual thing. I'm fine with the damage it does and the reflect that it's got, but the animation of the shield has a faster rotation than the character, so it looks like, if you're not looking at the character, if you look at the shield, it looks like there's going to be 3 hits that come out of the skill, but instead there's only 2, and that threw me off a fair number of times. That could just be me looking at it weird, but it just seemed odd. I would expect 3 hits and only get 2. For Rocket Charge, this skill was a lot of fun to use, and it was really nice for engaging on points, for getting across the field. It was very nice for getting across a point, say for a graveyard on full fire. If someone was across that middle point and I needed to get to them quickly, I could do that. I love the triple leap finisher aspect of it, but it was very unwieldy when I was actually trying to hit someone who was within its max distance. Whenever there was someone near me that I wanted to jump onto them right away, it seemed like it would always send me in the direction of where my character was facing instead of where my target was. So I would end up bounding away from my target and then bounding back, and then the third one would eventually hit them. And it was just really unwieldy to try and get it onto the people that I wanted to hit. It was also kind of wonky when I tried to use it in my static fields that I had all over the place, because I would end up bounding out of those fields and then back in, and it just was very hard to use properly. So there must be something there with where it's aimed versus where your target is. Maybe that's intended, but it was just not easy to get to where I wanted to go with it when I was trying to fight someone in close quarters. For the gyros, the AI on them is a little wonky. They have the tendency to go off in the middle of nowhere and then come back. It just wasn't reliable having a lot of those gyros out. Some of them would stick near me pretty reliably, but others had the tendency to go look at a random flower or something and then come back when I needed them right away. So something needs to be looked at with the AI there, but they weren't really reliable in a lot of cases where I needed them to be. The function gyro, stomping enemies, was kind of hit and miss. There would be some situations where I would be able to throw it out to an enemy across the point and then go do something else, and that stomp would be secure and everything would be fine. But there were a few times where the function gyro would be delayed. It would maybe take a second or two for it to start stomping, and by then the person would be stomped, had their allies there, and they got res, and just was kind of a waste. Also, with rezzing allies with it, it requires you to target that ally, and that's a little clunky as far as how that works versus stomping enemies with it. It just made things hard to do with the rezzing aspect of the function gyro, so maybe changing it so you don't need a target or something like that, and then if you need a specific one, then have a target, but it just felt weird, felt clunky trying to res allies with it. For the utility gyros, a couple of them I did like the effects of. I did like the medic gyro and I like the bulwark gyro. Those were very nice. They seemed to do their jobs fairly well. The bulwark gyro felt like it didn't have enough health for the effect it was doing, but then again, it may just be because I don't use, say, Phantasmal Defender on the Mesmer, and I'm not used to how much health that thing has. But either way, it just felt like Bulwark wasn't staying alive for super long, but it was definitely doing the job. I did notice the half damage reduction. That was doing fine. I like the tool belt skills for both Medic and Bulwark, the projectile deflection dome and the mobile water field. I really like the mobile water field from the Medic. That was a lot of fun to combo with rocket charge on the hammer, get a whole bunch of heals off and whatnot. The other 4 gyros I wasn't really happy with at all. With the Purge gyro, the initial Connie cleanse I noticed, but after that, I don't know if it was because of the AI or whatnot, but it just didn't seem to be doing the cleansing as often or as much as I would have expected it to. The tool belt skill for the Purge gyro I really wasn't a fan of because it didn't seem that effective. It was just a small poison field. It didn't feel like it had much impact on what I was doing. It just threw down a poison field and that was all there was to it. It didn't feel like that tool belt skill was really doing much for me. For the Seeker gyro or the Bomb gyro, or the one where you would tag someone with it and then it would go and explode, I really like the tool belt skill on it. I really like that instant super speed that you can give to yourself and allies because that ties in well with that regen swiftness / super speed trait that you can get with Scrapper. However, the gyro itself felt super clunky to use. It was very hard to land on people. It was very hard for it to even get to its target before it died from collateral damage. It just didn't feel good to use. It did not feel reliable or effective enough. And even the few times that I did manage to get it to hit, it didn't seem to make that big of a difference. It just didn't do enough and it was not reliable enough. So I'm not sure what needs to be done there. It just needs to be looked at. For the Shredder gyro, it didn't seem to really do much when I actually threw it out. It seemed like it needed a combo field to really be super effective. And even then, when I did throw it out for a combo field, it didn't make a huge difference because Whirl Bolts often don't do quite enough for the finishing that they're supposed to be doing, at least in my own experience. The tool belt skill for the Shredder gyro I did really like. I really liked the constant pulsing daze. It was really nice for disrupting people. It also combos well with a lot of traits the Shredder has. I liked the tool belt skill of the Shredder, just not the Shredder itself. And then finally the Sneak gyro, the Elite gyro, that was where you saw the AI problem the most. It didn't move fast enough to keep up with the player, and that caused a lot of issues. The effect itself, I like. The effect of keeping everyone within its radius stealth is nice, but I would almost rather have a Shadow Refuge. Arguably, you can just stand there with the gyro, get all that stealth, and then do it, but Shadow Refuge is just a lot more fluid compared to the Sneak gyro. The Tool Belt skill, I didn't really mess around with because I didn't use Sneak gyro all that much, but the AoE reveal, handy. I could see very good uses for it in a lot of PvP situations and even in some PvE situations, depending on what we see from maybe the raids and whatnot. But overall, Scrapper was a lot of fun. It has a few handling issues, and the gyros are definitely not where they need to be, but overall was a lot of fun. It seemed to synergize well with the engineer as a whole, and I had a good time with it. Alright, jumping over to Druid, I actually had a fair amount of fun with this, a lot more than I was expecting, because again, like I said before, Ranger is my least favorite class. I don't play Ranger very often, but Druid was a lot of fun. I liked having that nice heavy support and in some cases heavy CC role where I could run into a fight and feel like I was really making a difference in the support role. It reminded me a lot of the role I played back in WoW. I would play a Resto Druid there, I'd play that healer, and it felt very similar. It felt like someone had taken that Druid and ported it into Guild Wars 2, and I really like that. Druid itself felt like it had a nice, strong healing aspect to it, especially if you put on, say, a Settler's or a Cleric Amulet. It felt like it was very good for keeping allies alive, keeping itself alive. The Celestial form that it had, everything felt fairly responsive. It felt like it was doing what it needed to do. The giant AoE dazed heal ion cannon thing on the number 3 was a ton of fun to use. The spammable 1 heal was a lot of fun. Having the duality between glyphs was cool. Overall, the Druid was a lot more fun than I was expecting. For the staff, everything seemed to feel alright. I didn't notice anything that was overly clunky. The entangling roots, having the cast time plus the distance I had to travel seemed a little slow, but otherwise it seemed to be doing the job alright. I like that immediate immobilize. The healing wall that you can drop down was really nice. Apparently that wall also doubled as a water field because I was able to blast it with the number 3 and get AoE healing. Whether that is intended or not, I don't know, but it was still cool to have it. The mobility that you can get off of the number 3 is cool. The wisp that you can throw out from the number 2 and basically turn an enemy into a healing beacon for your allies, that's a cool mechanic. I like that. Now for the glyphs, some of them felt good. Some of them didn't really feel like they were making that big of an impact. The healing glyph, sometimes it felt like it was making a difference and other times it didn't. It felt like a very situation heavy glyph. It didn't seem like something that would really be super beneficial to run over, say, Troll Unguent in PvP. It seems like something you might want more in, say, a raid situation or a PvE situation, and if that's what it's designed for, that's perfectly fine. Another one was the damage increase or the healing increase glyph. I didn't really notice the effect on this thing. It seemed like something that should have some sort of aura or animation or glow or something to tell you that it's active. It just wasn't really clear when that effect was going on, as far as I could tell. The condition glyph, the celestial form aspect of it seemed pretty cool. The AoE condition clear and heal, that was fine, but the actual condition application version of it, when you weren't in celestial form, didn't really seem to make that much of a difference when I used it. The weakness is nice, but it seemed like the weakness and the cripple that went with it were cleared very quickly. It didn't seem like I had enough conditions spread to really protect those two conditions from being cleansed easily. Now, the 3 glyphs that I did like a lot were the Daze glyph, the Knockback glyph, and the Tether glyph. Those all seemed to make a pretty good difference when I used them. The Daze was nice for interrupting people, the Knockback was good for clearing people off points, the Tether was nice for punishing people who focused me when I was trying to do things outside of Celestial form, and tethering people when I was in Celestial form was also nice for increasing my outgoing healing, which was very potent when I was in that form. So some of the glyphs I think are pretty good as they are, and I think some of them need a little bit more maybe tuning up or maybe some visual improvements or something that makes it more clear when their effects are active. And then a couple overall things I noticed with the Druid. It seems like if you are not using a staff and you're not using Troll Unguent, you can't really get any of that energy, that life force up to activate Celestial form. And I can see a number of builds that would benefit from having Celestial form, but not benefit from having Staff or Troll Unguent. And it just seems like it forces you into using one or both of those things to have any regular access to Celestial form. It didn't feel like you could access that form, that core aspect of the elite specialization, without having the weapon or the heal or both. When you had both of them, you were able to access it all the time. But it seemed like without the staff mainly, you could not access that form a whole lot because it would just take ages to build up that energy. It feels like there should be energy gained from some other action that the ranger does while they are a druid. Alright, and now for the raid. We were able to get into the raid. There was about a 15-minute window of access we had very late at night for me, where the squad UI had been turned on. ArenaNet had turned on very briefly so a few people could get in and test the raid. What I did is I basically just grabbed a bunch of people from the stream and my friends list and the guild list and whatnot. I basically didn't want to lose this opportunity. I just threw a group together. That means there was no prior planning on composition. There was no real prior planning on roles people were playing, stuff like that. I kind of just grabbed a bunch of people and we all went in ASAP because we didn't want to let this opportunity go by. So as far as what we had to work with while we were fighting the boss, We didn't have a perfect composition, we did not have fully optimized gear, we did not have voice comms, we did not have a lot of things that an optimized group would have, and I am taking that into consideration with my impressions of the difficulty of the boss fight, but I'll go into that in a little bit. For those of you who are interested in some other footage or the entire session of the raiding that we did during that stream, I will leave a small little windowed annotation thing that you can click to go to that video. I did highlight the entire session, otherwise I'll just have some footage in the background while I talk over this. Now, one criticism I want to put out there before I go into my other impressions and whatnot, a lot of my impressions are very positive and I really enjoyed what I saw in the raid, but one thing I want to call out is there needs to be a better distinction between what is a trash mob and what is a boss. What it looked like there was everything was tagged as a legendary mob, and that led to some confusion for people who had gone in before thinking the trash mobs were the boss or were a series of bosses, when that's not the case. Those were trash mobs. I come from a raiding background in WoW for several years, 6 years even, and these were trash mobs. These were not a boss. These were not bosses themselves. These were all individual trash mobs that had unique mechanics designed to teach you about what you're going to be fighting with the boss. And there needs to be a clearer distinction between those mobs and then the actual boss mob itself. There needs to be maybe a special boss portrait just for raids. That would be a cool idea. I don't think it would be a great idea to turn all of the trash mobs before this boss into champions, because that kind of devalues how difficult they are. But maybe somehow better indicate that you are fighting trash mobs and then you are fighting a boss rather than just a bunch of legendary mobs. Now, speaking of said trash mobs, speaking of the 3 energy beings, anomalies, whatever they are before the boss, I like that they are somewhat difficult. You do have to pay attention, but they're not super crazy, you know, brick wall hard. They are trash mobs. They're meant to be killed the first time you attempt them, or maybe the second if you're not used to their mechanics. They have a pretty reasonable amount of health. They seem to do a reasonable amount of damage for raid mobs. They all have unique mechanics. I like the fact that they're going with kind of a Mega Man approach where each mob, each trash mob, is a different aspect of what you're fighting during the boss encounter. And it teaches the raid, it teaches you what you're going to be dealing with, or kind of gives you a heads up on some of the mechanics. It helps the raid prepare for something they're going to be fighting on the boss, whether they're aware of it or not. I like that kind of Mega Man-esque way of teaching players. Now, for the boss itself, I was pleasantly surprised. I saw a whole lot of mechanics going around that people had to be aware of, that were just thrown at you right away. The fact that it had multiple phases, the fact that it had transition phases between main phases, the fact that everything hit really hard, the fact that you needed multiple roles, not just, say, someone supporting people wearing, you know, damage gear, but you needed boon stripping, you needed condition builds, you needed direct damage builds, you needed people who could keep themselves alive. There was just a lot of stuff, a lot of things that needed to be taken into consideration, and I liked seeing that for the very first raid boss that ArenaNet has put into this raid wing. Their very first shot at doing raids in Guild Wars 2, I was pleasantly surprised to see that they had a lot of things going that were good and a lot of things that fit the bill of a raid boss. Now, as far as the overall impression of the difficulty that I got from this fight, I see this fight as something that will definitely break the unsuspecting pug group, or maybe the guild group that goes in not knowing what to expect. I could see this being something that absolutely slams people to the ground more than a few times. We didn't get past, I think, half health with the 9-man pug group unoptimized everything we had. We would always hit the enrage timer, which for the record is only 8 minutes. We only have 8 minutes to kill the thing. But how I see this is a fully optimized, fully coordinated with voice comms, maybe guild group or group of friends, people who prepare for this, people who are fully decked out with ascended gear and they've got the proper runes and everyone knows their role, and the fully prepared group, I don't think will have a terrible time with this fight. They will wipe a few times as they get used to different mechanics, but I don't think it will be too big of a deal. But that being said, they will need to be on top of their game, they will need to be paying attention, they will need to have damage perfect, they will need to have rules set in stone, they will need to have people doing what they need to do right away at any given time. It's not a forgiving fight. Even for a coordinated, fully prepared group, I think this will still be something that will engage them and keep them occupied for at least a little bit. And Of course, once people get the mechanics down and people have the ideal strategies in mind and whatnot, it'll get easier, but that's just how games go. But even still, it's not going to be one of those things where it just becomes face roll. People are still going to need to pay attention. This is a fight where, for the fully prepared, fully coordinated group, it'll be a fight that's fun, a fight that even if you put it on farm status, which for those who don't know, it means you can continually kill boss in one shot. Even put it on farm status, it'll still be an engaging encounter. It'll still be something that will require them to pay attention because of how tight the enrage timer is, because of how short the windows of opportunity you have to react to certain mechanics are, how important the different roles are. I think difficulty-wise, it feels good for a coordinated group for a first boss of the first wing. For an uncoordinated group like mine, or where we were handicapped or we weren't optimized and whatnot, there's going to be a lot of wiping, but that's fine. I want this content to be difficult, and it seems like ANET has gotten a pretty good thing going with just this first boss. And after wiping for the entire session, I'm excited to see what the rest of the raid is going to be. I am looking forward to more of this content. This definitely is scratching that raid itch that I've wanted in Guild Wars 2 for a long time. And my overall impression of it is very good, very positive. I really liked what I was seeing. The different phases of the boss have different mechanics that you have to deal with. We only saw some of the mechanics in Phase 2. We didn't even have a chance to really necessarily deal with them a whole lot because we would be hitting the enrage timer a whole bunch. But it seems like there's a lot going on in just this first fight, and that's something I really like seeing. That's something that gets me very excited for it. And I want to jump into this raid when it's finally released to the live client after the expansion comes out. Anyway guys, that's going to be it for my impressions of Beta Weekend 3. Hopefully you enjoyed the video, and with that, I will see you in the next video or around the stream. Take care everyone.